Amen, amen, amen. This is a perfect song for today. I want to talk about grace that welcomes home. Home has a sound, doesn't it? The creak of a familiar floorboard, the hum of laughter in the kitchen, the silence that somehow feels safe. Every house carries its own melody, a rhythm of coming and going, of resting and returning. When I think about home, I think about the way grace sounds when it opens the door before I even knock. But home doesn't only have a sound, it also has a feeling. It's that deep exhale when you cross the threshold and the world's weight slides off your shoulders. For me, home has always felt like Mama's kitchen. Now, Mama is with the ancestors now. She's an ancestor. But I still hear her voice when I walk into a room that smells like coffee and cinnamon. And I know that if life ever ran me ragged, just ran me over, if that was to happen, that I could go back home to Daddy and Mama B. I met them a few weeks ago. I could pull up in their driveway, open their refrigerator, raid whatever leftovers they have, sit at the counter and be reminded that no matter how messy life gets, there's a place that still wants me. And I believe that's true for you too. That's what home feels like. Home is not perfect, but possible. Even when we don't necessarily want to go back home, you know that you can. And I think that's what the church is called to be, a place where you know you can return when you need it most. And that's what we're trying to nurture here at Cairn. At Cairn, we know something about the sound and that feeling. We are, after all, a Cairn, a stack of stones built along a pathway to say, you're not alone on your journey. Others have walked this way before, and others will follow. Each stone says, keep going, you're almost home. This fall, under our theme, Grace in Action, we've been asking what grace looks like when it moves, when it feeds, when it forgives, when it welcomes, when it builds something that lasts. And today we come to a story about homecoming, about the kind of generosity that makes home possible. Jesus tells a story. You're familiar with it. A man has two sons. One demands his inheritance early, goes off to a distant country, squanders everything, and finally comes to himself, hungry, ashamed, and ready to go home. The other son stays, steady and resentful, doing everything right, but missing the party. A father runs to embrace the returning child, throws a feast, and invites the whole household to rejoice. We've heard it called the parable of the prodigal son, but maybe it's really the story of a generous parent, or even the family that learns grace the hard way. And yet, in this story, someone is missing. Someone who must have been there watching all of this unfold. Someone who knows both joy and grief, boundaries and mercy. What about the mother? Eleanor helps us imagine this mother. In her poem, The Prodigal Son, the Good Dad, and the Grieving Mom, Eleanor writes, two cherished children, two bereaved parents, hoping beyond hope, this time will be different. That line catches me, hoping beyond hope. Because every parent, every community, every church that loves deeply knows what it's like to hope beyond reason, to believe one more time that healing may be possible. Eleanor begins her poem with a sigh that feels almost like a prayer and protest rolled into one. Here we go again. Of course he comes home when needs demand. You can hear the exhaustion in those words. The kind of tire that only comes from love, the only tire that only love can cause. She's frustrated because she saw it coming. She knew the boy was going to take what was his way too early, too quickly, and run. She probably watched him pack the bags and thought, he's not ready, but I can't stop him. And then she carried her own grief, the ache of letting someone you love make choices that will hurt them. She carried her husband's grief, the silent disappointment of a father who gave away what he worked for. She carried her elder child's grief, the bitterness of being the responsible one. 3 griefs at least, maybe more than those 3 griefs. But we know something about carrying grief, don't we? the layered griefs that come with simply being human, the ones that are ours, the ones that we inherit, the griefs that we absorb from people we love. Now, wisdom does not mean pretending that those feelings don't exist. That's not even a faithful response to life. Wisdom and a faithful response is letting yourself feel them and still keeping the door cracked open for hope. The mother teaches us that. If she stuffed down the frustration, she never could have reached the final line of hope. And the same is true for us. If we won't tell the truth about what hurts, we can't move honestly toward healing. Sometimes grace begins not with joy, but with honesty. Sometimes stewardship begins with naming what feels lost before we can imagine what can be built again. Because generosity is not just about money. It's about trusting that love can hold all of our feelings and still move us toward renewal. I imagine this mother standing in the doorway of the home. She's seen enough broken promises to know better, and yet her heart still tilts toward grace. This mother, she loves both of her boys. She understands the father's impulse to run, but she also knows that welcoming home isn't simple. The love costs something. The mercy costs something. That home costs something. And that's where stewardship begins. We often talk about stewardship as giving to the church or pledging for the coming year. But at its core, stewardship is the sacred practice of sustaining what we love. The sacred practice of sustaining what we love. It's how we keep the lights on so that someone wandering in the dark can find their way home. It's how we stock the pantry so that communion bread and casseroles or whatever food we enjoy can feed hungry people. It's how we make sure this community remains open, affirming, intergenerational, and sustainable, not just for us, but for those who are still on the road. What we give, when we give, we are not paying dues. That's not what giving is. We are building home. That takes money and mercy. It takes pledges and presence. Because love without structure, it fades, and structure without love becomes a cage. Stewardship is what keeps grace alive between those two. Again, I picture this mother sitting at the table after the celebration, the candles burned low, and maybe she whispers to herself, "This time will be different." She knows better than anyone that forgiveness isn't forgetfulness. It's a choice to stay open even when it hurts. Maybe she's thinking about her elder child too, the one who stayed, the one who is angry and tired. She knows that both sons are lost in their own ways, and she knows at home must hold tension as well as kindness. That's what we're practicing here at Cairn. We're not a perfect home. No home is perfect. We don't have to pretend, right? Sometimes in homes we renovate. Sometimes we patch a roof or get a new roof. We repaint a wall. We rethink the layout so that everyone has room at the table. But the foundation is God's grace. This foundation is steady. The Spirit may keep arranging the furniture until everyone fits, but again, the foundation, God's grace, is steady. When the younger son finally came to himself, maybe he remembered not just his father's generosity, but his mother's table. The smell of bread, the sound of laughter, the warmth that said, "You belong here." I wonder if on that long walk home that he noticed little signs along the way, cairns of grace, a stranger who offered water, a memory that stirred hope, the dawning realization that even after all his mistakes, that love was still possible. Friends, Cairn is called to be that kind of signpost. When people drive past this building, when they join us on Zoom, when they walk through the doors, I know we all want them to sense that same grace. The grace that says, you are not beyond welcome. You are not too late to come home. And then there's this elder sibling standing outside the party, arms crossed, muttering, you can see it. All those years I've done everything right. We know that feeling, if we're honest. We know that feeling. The weariness of faithfulness, the sting of being overlooked, the anxiety that there might not be enough to go around. That's the lie of scarcity. that generosity is a sum-zero game, that someone else's blessings diminishes ours. But grace, it doesn't work that way. Grace is not pie. Pie is good, but grace is not pie, and neither is love. The more we share, the more it multiplies. When we give to sustain this community, we resist this scarcity story. We declare that abundance is possible even when the world says otherwise. We give because grace has already been given to us. The reality is, not everyone has a place to come home to. In our world today, countless people are displaced by war, poverty, bad politics, horrible policies that decides who belongs here and who belongs where. Some are literally being shipped away from one border to another. Others are spiritually displaced, carrying wounds from churches that told them they did not belong. And here we are, a congregation in Lafayette, Colorado, sometimes feeling small but always mighty, with an open table and a big heart. What if our calling is to be home for the displaced, those who are searching, those who are seeking? Even a temporary home, a refuge, a rest spot, a Cairn on the trail saying that you matter. And that's why our giving matters, because every act of generosity here ripples outward in shared food and spoken prayers and songs sung and hope rekindled. We keep the porch light on, not only for ourselves, but for the ones who are still searching. Grace also stretches us. Has anybody ever felt stretched by grace? It asks us to give in ways that require faith, but not self-destruction. To give until it feels like trust, not until it feels like despair. We don't give to break ourselves, we give to build something larger than ourselves. And maybe if you listen closely, we can hear that mother's prayer echoing still, hoping beyond hope that this time will be different. Different because we've learned that generosity is not just about the return of the prodigal, it's about the renewal of community. Different because we've discovered that money, when blessed by mercy, becomes ministry. Different because we know that pledges are not promises to an institution. They are promises to one another, to keep building a home where grace lives. I want you to take a moment to think about how many people have found home here in this community over the years. The child who grew up singing in the sanctuary and came back years later to baptize their own. The couple who thought that church would never feel safe again for them until they walked through these doors. Think about the person who wandered in during a hard season and stayed because someone remembered their name. This, beloved, is grace in action. This is stewardship embodied. And this is why we give, so that Cairn can continue to be a home for the children that are here now, outside playing, for the youth discovering who they are, for the adults carrying both hope and fatigue, and for those who haven't met yet, but who are already on their way. In the parable, the father says, we have to celebrate and rejoice. It wasn't optional. Joy was the proper response to resurrection. The son was dead and is now alive again. The son was lost and is now found. Church, we too have to celebrate, not because everything is perfect, but because grace keeps showing up. Because the Spirit keeps whispering, there is still room here. Our pledges, our offerings, our commitments are all acts of celebration. They say we believe God's love is worth sustaining. They keep the feast going. They fund the welcome. Giving helps to turn hope into practice. And maybe grace is still walking the road, still building homes, still lighting candles and windows. Maybe grace is the sound of a door opening, the sound of a community saying, you still have a place here. And maybe this story is not just about one son's return. Maybe it's about our own return. Because again, if we're honest, all of us at some point have been the one trying to find our way back. Back to ourselves after we lost track of who we are. Back to a faith that can hold questions we've been afraid to ask. Back to a community where we can be fully seen. And back to God, not the God of shame and anxiety and scarcity, but the God who runs to meet you, to meet us with joy and abundance, the God who says, welcome home. And maybe the difference this time is not that the prodigal son stays, or maybe the difference this time is the prodigal son stays. Maybe the elder son finally let go of the resentment that kept him from standing outside. Maybe the family finally learns how to live together again, not perfectly, but more tenderly, more truthfully, with more compassion. Maybe the difference this time is that we too stay, that we here at Cairn deepen our commitment to one another, our commitment, our care, our courage to show up for each other, that the challenges that used to trip us up won't trip us up again in the same way. Because now we know there's a place to return to, a place called home. A community with laughter and singing, a space where joy and concerns are carried together, a table that's wide enough for everyone to find a seat. And maybe that's the grace that God is offering us in this season. Not just to come home, but to become home for one another, to keep becoming home for one another. And that's what our giving sustains, that's what our pledges build, and that's what grace looks like in action. Again, this line, hope and beyond hope, is powerful to me today, because hope and beyond hope is not just wishful thinking. Hope and beyond hope is a way of living. It's choosing to believe that God's abundance can shape us into people who stay, who share, who grow, and who love. The story isn't over. The road home is still being walked. Grace is still in motion. And maybe, just maybe, God is asking us to put our grace in action, to keep the porch light on, to set one another, to set a place and a space and another space at the table, to give in a way that welcomes home, that welcomes people back with authenticity, with realness, with truth. Hope beyond hope, church, that this time can be different if we'll live like grace still has room to grow. Amen.